The smell of overcooked pot roast filled the Henderson kitchen as Patricia stared at the clock above their microwave. 7:47 p.m. Again. For the third time this week, Robert was late coming home from his dental practice in downtown Springfield, Illinois, and dinner was getting cold. She turned off the oven with more force than necessary, the metallic click echoing through their split-level home on Maple Street. "Mom, where's Dad?" called out their youngest, Emma, from the living room where she was sprawling across the couch with her homework. "Working late." Again, Patricia replied, her voice carrying that familiar edge of irritation that had become as routine as Robert's tardiness. At 48, Patricia Henderson had perfected the art of running a household like a well-oiled machine. 4 kids, though, only Emma was still at home at 16, had taught her efficiency, organization, and the kind of multitasking that would make a CEO jealous. She managed Robert's dental office during the day, ran her own small accounting business from their home office in the evenings, and somehow kept their family connected across 2 different states where their adult children had scattered. But efficiency, she was learning, wasn't the same as happiness. The front door finally opened at 8:15 p.m., and Robert's familiar shuffle echoed through the entryway. At 52, he moved with the careful precision of a man who spent his days hunched over patients' mouths, his shoulders permanently rounded from decades of detailed work. "Hey," he said, appearing in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his blue scrubs with coffee stains down the front. Patricia didn't look up from the dishwasher. "Your dinner's in the fridge." "Thanks." Robert stood there for a moment, keys still in his hand. "That root canal took forever. Mrs. Wilson was..." Patricia continued loading dishes with deliberate precision. Robert got the message. He opened the fridge, pulled out his plate, peeled back the plastic wrap. The silence stretched between them like a rubber band about to snap. This was their dance. Had been for months now, maybe longer. Robert would come home late, Patricia would be irritated but not say much about it, and they'd spend the evening in parallel live shim watching the news, her catching up on bookkeeping or family logistics. Roommates sharing a mortgage and a last name. Robert stuck his plate in the microwave, the familiar hum filling the silence. "How was your day?" "Busy." Patricia wiped down the counter for the second time. "Your mother called about Thanksgiving. She wants to know if we're coming up to Peoria this year or if she should plan on coming here." "What did you tell her?" "That we'd talk about it." Patricia finally looked at him, noting how his graying hair stuck up in the back and how he'd somehow gotten what looked like dental impression material on his shirt collar. "Though, honestly, I don't know why she asks me. It's your mother." Robert nodded and pulled his reheated dinner from the microwave. The pot roast looked dry and unappetizing under the kitchen's fluorescent lights. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. "Oh, and the Mitchells invited us to their anniversary party next Saturday," Patricia added, folding the dish towel with sharp, precise movements. "Their 25th. Do we have to?" The question hung in the air between them. Patricia felt something twist in her chest. When had they become people who dreaded social gatherings? When had spending time together become something to endure rather than enjoy? "I already said yes," she said. "They're good friends, Robert." Robert shrugged. "Fine. Just... what time?" He took his plate to the living room, settling into his recliner with a grunt that sounded older than his 52 years. Patricia could hear the television click on, the familiar sounds of the evening news creating a buffer between their worlds. Later that evening, as Robert settled deeper into his recliner, Patricia couldn't help herself. "You know, if you left the office 15 minutes earlier, dinner wouldn't be cold every night." Robert's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "I can't just leave patients sitting in the chair, Pat. I'm not saying abandon patients. I'm saying better time management." "Right." Robert's voice went flat. He took another bite, chewing slowly. "Thanks for the advice." Patricia opened her mouth to explain that she wasn't criticizing, just trying to help, but Robert had already turned his attention to the television. The volume went up slightly, his signal that the conversation was over. Patricia retreated to the kitchen, clattering dishes more loudly than necessary. Another evening, another small battle that neither of them had won. She stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of another day. Emma's backpack on the counter, bills stacked by the telephone, the weekly grocery list magneted to the refrigerator. Their life was perfectly organized, perfectly functional, and perfectly empty of anything that resembled the passion they'd once shared. 22 years ago, Robert Henderson had been the charming dental student who made her laugh during their college study groups at the University of Illinois. He'd had this way of explaining complex concepts that made even organic chemistry seem interesting, and when he'd asked her to marry him during their senior year, she'd said yes without hesitation. He was steady, kind, ambitious in a quiet way that promised security and partnership. Now, watching him eat dinner alone in front of the television, Patricia couldn't remember the last time they'd had a real conversation about dreams, fears, hopes, the kind of talks that had kept them up late in their tiny apartment during those early years when they had nothing but each other and everything felt possible. "I'm going to bed," she announced to no one in particular, though she could see Robert's profile in the living room, illuminated by the blue glow of the television screen. "Okay," he said without turning around. "I'll be up in a bit." But they both knew he wouldn't be. He'd fall asleep in that chair, wake up around midnight with a crick in his neck, and stumble upstairs to slip into bed without waking her. She'd hear him, though, the careful way he'd try to be quiet, the soft sigh he'd make as he settled under the covers on his side of their king-sized bed with its clearly defined territory. Upstairs in their bedroom, Patricia went through her nightly routine with the same methodical efficiency she applied to everything else. Face wash, moisturizer, teeth brushed, hair pulled back. In the mirror, she looked like what she was, a sad 48-year-old woman who had somehow forgotten to take care of her marriage. The next mornings brought their typical routine. Patricia found herself standing at the kitchen sink, watching Robert through the window as he scraped ice off his windshield. She'd been about to call out that he should start his car earlier to let it warm up, when she caught herself. How many times had she given him that same advice? How many times had he ignored it? Robert ate breakfast standing at the counter while checking his phone. Patricia packed Emma's lunch while mentally reviewing her day's appointments. And nobody spoke beyond good morning and logistics about who would pick up Emma from volleyball practice. As Robert grabbed his coffee mug and headed for the door, he paused to squeeze Emma's shoulder. "Good luck on that chemistry test," he said. "Thanks, Dad. I studied the molecular structures like you suggested." "You'll do great. You're smart like your mom." The compliment caught Patricia off guard. When was the last time she'd heard Robert say something nice about her, even indirectly? When was the last time she'd said something nice about him? After they left, Patricia sat alone in the kitchen with her own coffee, thinking about the man who'd just walked out the door. The man who remembered to encourage their daughter about tests, who worked late because he cared about his patients' comfort. When had she stopped seeing that man and started seeing only his flaws? We're witnessing the gradual erosion that destroys most long-term marriages, the replacement of appreciation with criticism and acceptance with constant evaluation. Patricia's inability to simply let Robert explain about his late day reveals a woman who's stopped listening to her husband. Robert attempts to share about his challenging day, but Patricia's nonverbal communication, the deliberate dish loading, sends a clear message that his explanations aren't welcome. Over time, this pattern trains husbands to stop sharing altogether, creating the very emotional distance wives often complain about. Robert's question about the anniversary party, "Do we have to?" isn't just about social obligations. It's about a man who no longer finds joy in his wife's company. When Patricia offers unsolicited advice about Robert's schedule management, this is actually a profound act of disrespect, implying that Roberta's successful professional who manages complex dental procedures and runs a thriving practice somehow lacks the basic competence to manage his own time. His flat response and subsequent emotional withdrawal demonstrate how criticism, even well-intentioned criticism, creates distance rather than improvement. The key insight here is that Patricia's behavior isn't malicious, it's misguided. She genuinely believes she's being helpful, but help that isn't requested often feels like criticism to the recipient. Every suggestion for improvement, every correction, every piece of unsolicited advice sends the message that Robert's best efforts aren't good enough. Over time, this dynamic creates a mother-child relationship where the wife manages and the husband either rebels or retreats. On a gray February morning in Springfield, Patricia Henderson sat in her car outside St. Mark's Community Church, watching couples stream through the front doors for the Wednesday evening service. She'd been sitting there for 20 minutes. The dashboard clock read 6:47 p.m. Robert thought she was at her book club, a lie that had come so easily it scared her. But book club had been canceled, and instead of going home to another evening of parallel lives, she'd found herself here, in the parking lot of the church they'd attended sporadically over the years, feeling lost in her own life. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emma. Dad made grilled cheese. Said you're at book club. When you coming home? Patricia stared at the message. Around 9, she typed back, then immediately felt guilty for the deception. The truth was, she didn't know where else to go. Home felt like a stage where she performed the role of wife and mother without feeling connected to either identity. The dental office was just work managing schedules and insurance claims and the endless stream of patients who treated her like part of the furniture. Her accounting clients were numbers on spreadsheets, not real relationships. When had her world become so small? Through the church windows, she could see couples sitting together, families with teenagers. The Wilsons from their neighborhood walked past her car, Tom's arm around Linda's waist as they laughed about something. They'd been married longer than Patricia and Robert, had weathered their own storms, but somehow they still looked like they genuinely enjoyed being together. Patricia's chest tightened with something that felt dangerously close to envy. She almost didn't go in, but something about sitting alone in a parking lot on a Wednesday evening, lying to her family about where she was, felt like rock bottom. She needed something, a sign, a word, anything that might help her understand what had gone wrong with her life. The church service was already starting when she finally walked inside. She slipped into a back pew, feeling like an imposter among these people who seemed to have figured out something she was missing. The pastor, named David, was talking about relationships. Marriage isn't about finding the right person, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary. It's about being the right person. It's about showing up every day with love instead of judgment, with acceptance instead of criticism. I see couples all the time who've turned their marriages into improvement projects. Pastor David continued. They're so busy trying to fix each other that they've forgotten how to enjoy each other. They've become roommates sharing a mortgage instead of lovers sharing a life. The words hit Patricia like a physical blow. Roommates sharing a mortgage. That's exactly what she and Robert had become. After the service, she sat in her car again, this time crying. She'd been so focused on keeping everything running smoothly that she'd forgotten to tend to the relationship that was supposed to be at the center of it all. Her phone rang. Robert. You still at Sarah's? Robert's voice sounded muffled, like he was lying down. Yeah, just leaving. Patricia wiped her nose with a tissue. Drive safe, it's starting to rain. I will. The drive home took her through their old neighborhood. She turned down Elm Street and slowed in front of 1247, their first house together. A young couple lived there now. She could see them through the front window, the woman laughing at something the man was saying as they cooked dinner together. Patricia remembered being that woman, 25 years old, newlywed, convinced that love could conquer anything. She and Robert used to cook together in that tiny kitchen, bumping into each other and stealing kisses while the pasta boiled over. They'd talk for hours about everything and nothing: his patience, her dreams of starting her own business, the family they wanted to build together. What had happened to those people? The answer, she realized, was life. 4 pregnancies, sleepless nights with babies, financial stress during Robert's early years building his practice, the constant juggling of children's needs and career demands. Somewhere in the midst of building a successful life together, they'd stopped building their relationship. She had become so good at managing everything, even Robert. Subtle corrections about his driving, suggestions about his clothing choices, gentle criticism disguised as helpful advice. She'd convinced herself she was being supportive, but then she realized that those things had chipped away at his confidence, at his desire to please her. And Robert had simply withdrawn. He'd stopped trying to initiate conversations about anything deeper than schedules. He'd stopped reaching for her hand during movies. He'd stopped looking at her like she was someone he wanted to know better rather than someone he had to live with. On a gray February morning in Springfield, Patricia Henderson sat in her car outside St. Mark's Community Church, watching couples stream through the front doors for the Wednesday evening service. She'd been sitting there for 20 minutes. The dashboard clock read 6:47 p.m. Robert thought she was at her book club, a lie that had come so easily it scared her. But book club had been canceled, and instead of going home to another evening of parallel lives, she'd found herself here, in the parking lot of the church they'd attended sporadically over the years, feeling lost in her own life. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emma. Dad made grilled cheese. Said you're at book club. When you coming home? Patricia stared at the message. Around 9, she typed back, then immediately felt guilty for the deception. The truth was, she didn't know where else to go. Home felt like a stage where she performed the role of wife and mother without feeling connected to either identity. The dental office was just work managing schedules and insurance claims and the endless stream of patients who treated her like part of the furniture. Her accounting clients were numbers on spreadsheets, not real relationships. When had her world become so small? Through the church windows, she could see couples sitting together, families with teenagers. The Wilsons from their neighborhood walked past her car, Tom's arm around Linda's waist as they laughed about something. They'd been married longer than Patricia and Robert, had weathered their own storms, but somehow they still looked like they genuinely enjoyed being together. Patricia's chest tightened with something that felt dangerously close to envy. She almost didn't go in, but something about sitting alone in a parking lot on a Wednesday evening, lying to her family about where she was, felt like rock bottom. She needed something, a sign, a word, anything that might help her understand what had gone wrong with her life. The church service was already starting when she finally walked inside. She slipped into a back pew, feeling like an imposter among these people who seemed to have figured out something she was missing. The pastor, named David, was talking about relationships. Marriage isn't about finding the right person, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary. It's about being the right person. It's about showing up every day with love instead of judgment, with acceptance instead of criticism. I see couples all the time who've turned their marriages into improvement projects. Pastor David continued. They're so busy trying to fix each other that they've forgotten how to enjoy each other. They've become roommates sharing a mortgage instead of lovers sharing a life. The words hit Patricia like a physical blow. Roommates sharing a mortgage. That's exactly what she and Robert had become. After the service, she sat in her car again, this time crying. She'd been so focused on keeping everything running smoothly that she'd forgotten to tend to the relationship that was supposed to be at the center of it all. Her phone rang. Robert. You still at Sarah's? Robert's voice sounded muffled, like he was lying down. Yeah, just leaving. Patricia wiped her nose with a tissue. Drive safe, it's starting to rain. I will. The drive home took her through their old neighborhood. She turned down Elm Street and slowed in front of 1247, their first house together. A young couple lived there now. She could see them through the front window, the woman laughing at something the man was saying as they cooked dinner together. Patricia remembered being that woman. 25 years old, newlywed, convinced that love could conquer anything. She and Robert used to cook together in that tiny kitchen, bumping into each other and stealing kisses while the pasta boiled over. They'd talk for hours about everything and nothing: his patience, her dreams of starting her own business, the family they wanted to build together. What had happened to those people? The answer, she realized, was life. 4 pregnancies, sleepless nights with babies, financial stress during Robert's early years building his practice, the constant juggling of children's needs and career demands. Somewhere in the midst of building a successful life together, they'd stopped building their relationship. She had become so good at managing everything, even Robert. Subtle corrections about his driving, suggestions about his clothing choices, gentle criticism disguised as helpful advice. She'd convinced herself she was being supportive, but then she realized that those things had chipped away at his confidence, at his desire to please her. And Robert had simply withdrawn. He'd stopped trying to initiate conversations about anything deeper than schedules. He'd stopped reaching for her hand during movies. He'd stopped looking at her like she was someone he wanted to know better rather than someone he had to live with. By the time Patricia pulled into their driveway on Maple Street, the house was dark except for the porch light Robert had left on for her. She sat in the car for a few more minutes, looking at their home, the place where they'd raised their children, built their careers, created what looked from the outside like a successful life. But success, she was learning, wasn't the same as happiness, and efficiency wasn't the same as love. Inside, the house felt too quiet. Emma had gone to bed, her chemistry textbook still spread across the kitchen table. Robert's dinner dishes were washed and put away. Patricia found a note on the counter in Robert's handwriting. Emma's test is tomorrow. She was worried about the molecular structures. Might need extra encouragement in the morning. Even his notes were about logistics, about managing their daughter's needs rather than connecting with his wife. It's been a long time since they stopped leaving each other love notes and started leaving each other task lists. On Friday evening, she was cleaning up after dinner when she overheard Robert on the phone in the living room. "No, Mom, we can't come up for Thanksgiving this year. Patricia's been really stressed with work, and I think she needs a quiet holiday at home." Patricia paused in her dish loading. She'd never told Robert she was stressed about Thanksgiving at his mother's house. She'd never said she preferred staying home. But somehow he'd picked up on her feelings and made the decision to protect her from additional pressure. That night, Patricia found herself wanting to say something about what she'd overheard. "Thanks for handling the Thanksgiving with your mom." Robert looked up from his book, surprised. "You heard that?" "Yeah, I appreciate it." He nodded slowly. "I figured you had enough on your plate." It was such a simple exchange, but it felt like the first real conversation they'd had in weeks. Patricia lay awake long after Robert had fallen asleep, thinking about the man lying 3 feet away from her. A man who still noticed when she was overwhelmed, who still made decisions based on her comfort, who still cared about her happiness even though she'd spent years criticizing his methods and managing his choices. Patricia's church parking lot breakdown is a crucial moment that many wives experience but rarely recognize for what it is. Her tears are about grief for a relationship that has slowly died while everyone was too busy to notice. Robert's phone call checking on Patricia shows that despite their distance, he's still attuned to her safety and well-being. Patricia recognizes that maybe the problem wasn't that Robert had stopped being the man she married. Maybe the problem was that she'd stopped seeing him. The key insight here is that Robert has been consistently showing love through actions, maintaining the house, caring for Emma's needs, protecting Patricia from additional stress, but Patricia has been so focused on his methods, coming home late, eating dinner in front of television, not initiating deep conversations, that she's missed his heart. This is a common pattern. Wives expecting love to be expressed in female-preferred ways while missing the male, typical expressions of love. Both partners are actually trying to show love, but they're speaking different languages. Robert expresses care through actions and responsibility. Patricia has been looking for care through emotional connection and verbal affirmation. Neither approach is wrong, but the mismatch in expectations has created a cycle of disappointment and withdrawal. The solution isn't for Robert to become more emotionally expressive or for Patricia to lower her expectations. The solution is for Patricia to recognize and appreciate the love that's already being offered, which will naturally inspire Robert to offer more of what she's seeking. 2 weeks after Patricia's church parking lot revelation, she found herself sitting in their sofa at 2 a.m., opening her laptop and started typing into the search bar. Marriage feels like roommates. The results were depressingly abundant. Forums of women describing exactly what Patricia was experiencing. Relationship articles with titles like "When Your Marriage Becomes a Business Partnership" and "How to Reconnect with Your Distant Spouse." Most of the advice was nothing more than what she had already known. Communicate more, schedule date nights, try new activities together. All things that required mutual effort, mutual awareness that there was a problem to solve. Patricia had tried suggesting a weekend getaway last month, and Robert had agreed with the enthusiasm of someone scheduling a dentist appointment. She was about to close the laptop when a different kind of article caught her eye. "What I Learned When I Stopped Trying to Fix My Husband." The title made her pause. She'd been so focused on getting Robert to change, to be more communicative, more affectionate, more engaged. What if the problem wasn't Robert at all? The article was written by Jennifer from Portland, describing how her marriage had transformed when she stopped criticizing her husband's driving, stopped suggesting what he should wear, stopped offering unsolicited advice about everything from his work to his dietary choices. "I realized I'd become his mother instead of his wife," Jennifer wrote. "I was so busy trying to improve him that I forgot to enjoy him." Patricia's chest tightened with recognition. How many times in the past week had she corrected Robert's approach to something? Just yesterday, she'd criticized the way he'd loaded the dishwasher, moved dishes around to her preferred arrangement while explaining her more efficient system. The look on his face, resignation mixed with irritation, suddenly took on new meaning. She scrolled through more stories. Women describing how they'd stopped managing their husbands' calendars and found their husbands becoming more socially engaged. Women who'd stepped back from controlling household decisions and watched their husbands step up in ways they'd never expected. A woman from Texas describing how she'd stopped reminding her husband about his mother's birthday and watched him, for the first time in years, remember on his own and plan something thoughtful. "I thought I was being helpful," she wrote, "but I was actually preventing him from being the man I fell in love with." Patricia closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen, processing what she'd read. All this time, she'd been waiting for Robert to change, to become more engaged, more communicative, more romantic. But what if her own behavior was preventing exactly those changes she wanted to see? She thought about their early relationship, how Robert had pursued her with quiet determination. He'd remembered her favorite coffee order without being told, noticed when she was stressed about exams, planned simple but thoughtful dates. The next morning, Patricia decided to experiment. When Robert ate breakfast standing at the counter, she resisted the urge to suggest he sit down and eat properly. When he couldn't find his reading glasses, she didn't point out where he always left them, she just said, "I haven't seen them," and let him find them himself. Small changes, barely noticeable, but they felt monumental to her. That evening, when Robert came home 20 minutes late again, Patricia was sitting in the living room reading instead of bustling around the kitchen radiating irritation. "Hey," Robert said in the doorway. He looked genuinely surprised to see her relaxed, not visibly frustrated by his tardiness. "Hi," Patricia replied, looking up with what she hoped was a genuine smile. "How was your day?" "Busy." Robert paused, clearly expecting some comment about dinner being delayed. When none came, he continued, "Mrs. Patterson needed an emergency crown repair. How was yours?" "Good. I finished the Morrison account books. Emma's at soccer practice until 6. Robert nodded, still seeming off balance by the absence of her usual subtle criticism about his schedule. "I guess I'll grab a quick shower before dinner?" "Sounds good. I was thinking of ordering pizza anyway." "Pizza sounds great," Robert said slowly. While Robert showered, Patricia ordered from their usual place, then sat back down. She could hear him moving around upstairs, probably wondering what had prompted her unusually relaxed approach to his late arrival. When he came back downstairs, his hair still damp, Patricia felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in months. Simple appreciation for how he looked. Not criticism about his clothing choices or suggestions for improvement, just the recognition that she found him attractive. "Pizza should be here in 30 minutes, she said. "Great." Robert settled into his usual chair, but instead of immediately reaching for the remote, he looked at her. "What are you reading?" The question caught Patricia off guard. When was the last time Robert had shown interest in her activities beyond their direct impact on family logistics? "Just some mystery novel," Sarah recommended. Patricia held up the book, realizing she couldn't even remember the plot. She'd been so distracted by her thoughts that she'd been reading the same page for 20 minutes. "Any good?" "Honestly, I'm having trouble getting into it." "Work stuff on your mind?" There it was, an opening for real conversation. The kind they used to have before every interaction became about schedules and responsibilities. She took a breath and decided to be honest. "Not work, just thinking about things." Robert waited. In that waiting, Patricia recognized something she'd forgotten. He was actually a good listener. She'd become so accustomed to managing conversations, directing them toward practical outcomes, that she'd forgotten Robert's natural tendency to simply hear what she had to say. "I've been thinking about us," she said quietly, "about how we've gotten stuck." Robert's expression grew more serious. "Stuck how?" Patricia chose her words carefully. This was about taking responsibility for her own part in their distance. "I think I've been managing you," she said finally, "like we're business partners instead of." She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Instead of what we used to be," Robert said quietly. "Yeah." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Patricia could hear the pizza delivery car pulling into their driveway. Over the following days, Patricia began what felt like an experiment in being a wife instead of a manager. When Robert mentioned being tired, instead of suggesting he get more sleep or drink less coffee, she simply said, "I'm sorry you're tired." When he couldn't find his reading glasses, instead of pointing out where he always left them, she helped him look without commentary about developing better habits. The changes were subtle but noticeable. Robert seemed less defensive, more relaxed in her presence. He started lingering in the kitchen during their morning routines instead of escaping to his car as quickly as possible. He began sharing small details about his day-funny patient stories, frustrations with insurance companies without being prompted. On Thursday evening, Patricia was loading the dishwasher after dinner when Robert appeared beside her with a dish towel. "I'll dry," he said. They worked together in silence. Patricia had to resist the urge to reorganize the way Robert stacked the plates in the cabinet to explain her preferred system for arranging glasses. Instead, she just enjoyed having him next to her, the comfortable rhythm of their shared task. "Emma seems happy about the college acceptances," Robert said, carefully drying a wine glass. "She's torn between Illinois and Northwestern. Good problems to have. She'll figure it out. She's smart like you." Patricia glanced at him. "She gets her analytical side from you." Robert smiled. It was such an ordinary conversation, but it felt extraordinary to Patricia. When was the last time they'd simply talked about their daughter without it becoming a discussion of logistics or responsibilities? On Saturday afternoon, Patricia was in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower beds they'd planted years ago. She'd been working for about an hour when Robert appeared with a pair of gardening gloves. "Mind if I help?" he asked. The offer was so unexpected. "I'd love the help," she said. Robert straightened up, pulling off his gloves. "These roses are a mess." "I know. I keep meaning to prune them properly." Patricia attacked a particularly stubborn weed. "Didn't we plant these when Emma was little?" "Emma was 3. You complained the whole time about the thorns." "Still complaining." Robert showed her a fresh scratch on his forearm. Patricia almost launched into her usual lecture about wearing long sleeves when working with roses, but caught herself. Instead, she just said, "Battle scars." Worth it, though. Robert looked around at their progress. Place is starting to look decent again. They worked in silence for a while. Patricia found herself stealing glances at Robert as he wrestled with an overgrown hedge. Remember how we used to do this every weekend our first spring here? Patricia said, pulling up a clump of dandelions. You had that whole garden plan mapped out, color-coordinated by season. And you told me the flowers didn't read the plan so they'd bloom when they wanted to. They mostly did. Robert gestured toward the mixed border that had long since abandoned Patricia's original design. Looks better this way, actually. More natural. Patricia realized he was right. The garden had evolved into something more relaxed, more cottage-like than her original formal design. It was messier but somehow more welcoming. Patricia found herself genuinely laughing, not the polite chuckle, but real laughter. Later, as they got ready for bed, Robert paused in the bathroom doorway. Today was nice, he said quietly. It was. Patricia agreed. We should do that more often. Spend time together, I mean. Just hanging out. Patricia felt something warm unfurl in her chest. I'd like that. As she lay in bed that night, listening to Robert's breathing even out beside her, Patricia realized that the change she'd been hoping for hadn't required Robert to become a different person. It had required her to remember who he actually was, the man she'd chosen to marry. The man who was perfectly capable of making good decisions when she stopped second-guessing all of them. For the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow, curious about what other discoveries might be waiting if she continued this experiment. 2 weeks later, Patricia was getting ready for work when she realized Robert was humming in the shower. Actually humming. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard him do that. At breakfast, instead of the usual rushed parallel routines, Robert poured her a cup of coffee without being asked. Thanks, she said, surprised by the small gesture. You look tired. Rough night? Patricia had been up late finishing a client's quarterly reports, but she was touched that he'd noticed. Just work stuff. But this helps, she said, raising the coffee mug. I could pick up Emma from practice today if you want to get caught up on things, Robert offered. You don't mind? Nah. She's been wanting to show me this new serve she's working on anyway. The offer was so casually generous that Patricia felt a little overwhelmed. When had Robert started volunteering to adjust his schedule for her convenience? That evening, Patricia was in the kitchen starting dinner when Robert and Emma came through the front door, both talking animatedly about volleyball strategies. Mom, Dad knows so much about serves, Emma announced. He used to play in college. Really? Patricia looked at Robert with surprise. I didn't know you played volleyball. Intramural, Robert said, looking slightly embarrassed. Nothing serious. He showed me this technique for getting more power, Emma continued. Can he come to my next game? I want to try it in a real match. Patricia watched this exchange with fascination. When had her daughter started seeking out Robert's advice about sports? When had Robert become someone Emma turned to for athletic guidance? Of course Dad can come to your game, Patricia said. I didn't realize you two were volleyball strategists now. Dad knows a lot of stuff, Emma said matter-of-factly, grabbing an apple from the counter. I'm going to call Jess and tell her about the serve thing. She disappeared upstairs, leaving Patricia and Robert alone in the kitchen. She's been asking me about college too, Robert said, washing his hands at the sink. About what it was like, how to choose between schools. What did you tell her? That she should go with her gut, that the school that feels right probably is right. Robert dried his hands, considering. Also, that she doesn't have to have everything figured out at 18. I changed my major 3 times. Patricia started to say something about the importance of academic planning, then stopped herself. Robert's advice was actually quite good. And more importantly, Emma was coming to him for guidance, something that wouldn't happen if he weren't worth listening to. She trusts your judgment, Patricia said instead. Robert looked surprised by the observation. You think so? I know so. I can see it in how she talks to you. That night, as they were watching the news together, Robert mentioned that his practice had been asked to participate in a community dental health program. It would be one Saturday a month, providing free cleanings for people who can't afford regular care, he explained. But it would mean I'm gone most of those Saturdays. The old Patricia would have immediately started calculating the impact on their weekend plans, the lost income, the disruption to their routine. She would have peppered him with questions about logistics and expressed concerns about overcommitting. Now instead, she found herself focusing on something else entirely. That sounds really meaningful, she said. You'd be helping people who really need it. Robert looked at her carefully, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. You don't mind the Saturday commitment? Why would I mind? It's important work. It doesn't pay anything. Actually costs us money in supplies and office time. Patricia considered this. The old her would have pointed out that they had college tuition coming up, that every Saturday away was lost family time, that he was already working long hours. But looking at Robert's face, she could see how much this opportunity meant to him. Some things are more important than money, she said. This sounds like one of them. Robert's expression shifted to something she hadn't seen in a long time, pure appreciation. Thank you, he said quietly, for understanding. It was such a simple exchange, but Patricia could feel how much it meant to both of them. She was seeing Robert as the man she'd fallen in love with, someone who cared about making a difference, who wanted to use his skills to help others. And he was seeing her as a partner who supported his values rather than someone who questioned his every decision. 3 months into what Patricia had started thinking of as her experiment, she realized it was no longer an experiment at all. Being respectful instead of critical had become natural. Appreciating Robert instead of correcting him felt automatic, and the results were undeniable. Robert had signed up for the community dental program and came home from those Saturdays energized and fulfilled. He'd started planning small weekend activities for the family without being prompted. He'd taken over several household responsibilities that had always fallen to Patricia, not because she'd asked, but because he'd noticed they needed doing. Most remarkably, he'd started pursuing her again. Not dramatically, but in small ways that reminded her of their early relationship. He'd bring her coffee in the morning. He'd suggest watching movies together. He'd reach for her hand during their evening walks around the neighborhood. Patricia was standing in the kitchen one evening, watching Robert help Emma with her college application essays, when she realized something profound had shifted. She wasn't just tolerating her marriage anymore. She was enjoying it. Mom, come look at this. Emma called from the dining room table where she and Robert were hunched over her laptop. Dad helped me figure out how to write about my volunteer work. Patricia joined them, reading over Emma's shoulder. The essay was thoughtful, well-structured, and genuinely moving. Robert had helped Emma find her own voice rather than imposing his ideas on her writing. This is beautiful, honey, Patricia said, squeezing Emma's shoulder. Then to Robert, good coaching, Dad. Robert smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. She did all the work, I just asked questions. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Patricia and Robert found themselves lingering at the kitchen table with their coffee, something that hadn't happened in years. She's going to do fine in college, Robert said. Whatever she chooses. I know, but I'm going to miss her. Me too. Robert was quiet for a moment. It'll be different, just the two of us again. I think it'll be good, Patricia said. We can remember how to be married instead of just being parents. Robert reached across the table and covered her hand with his. I'd like that. The simple touch sent warmth through Patricia's entire body. When was the last time Robert had reached for her spontaneously? When was the last time his touch had felt like affection rather than obligation? I've been thinking, Robert said, his hand still covering hers. Maybe we could take that trip you mentioned. After Emma graduates. Just the two of us somewhere. Patricia felt tears prick her eyes. Months ago, when she'd suggested a weekend getaway, Robert had agreed with obvious reluctance. Now he was proposing an actual trip, something he wanted to do rather than something he felt obligated to endure. "Where would you want to go?" she asked. "I don't know. Somewhere we can just be together without schedules or obligations." "That sounds perfect." As they sat in their kitchen, hands linked across the table where they'd shared thousands of meals over the years, Patricia marveled at how much had changed by changing so little. She hadn't asked Robert to transform himself or communicate differently, or express his feelings more openly. She'd simply stopped managing him and started appreciating him. The man she'd fallen in love with had been there all along, waiting to be rediscovered. Patricia's transformation is one of the most challenging yet powerful shifts a wife can make, moving from control to trust, from management to partnership. Her late-night research breakthrough recognizing that she'd become Robert's mother instead of his wife is the crucial first step in reclaiming a marriage that had devolved into a parent-child dynamic. The key insight Patricia discovered is that her helpful behavior was actually preventing Robert from being the man she fell in love with. Every time she reorganized the dishwasher after he'd loaded it, every time she offered advice about his schedule, every time she managed social obligations for both of them, she was sending the message that his efforts weren't good enough. When she stopped radiating irritation about his tardiness, he became more engaging. When she stopped managing their dinner routine, he became more flexible and appreciative. When she worked beside him in the garden without directing his efforts, he remembered why he enjoyed her company. The gardening represents the return of parallel intimacy, being together without agenda, enjoying each other's presence without the pressure to accomplish specific relationship goals. This type of connection is more powerful than forced conversations about feelings because it allows natural affection to resurface. Emma's reactions highlight how children are affected by their parents' relationship. Her surprise at seeing her parents enjoy each other's company, followed by her increased willingness to seek Robert's guidance, shows how a father's confidence and authority in the home directly correlates with how his wife treats him. When wives step back from managing every aspect of family life, husbands naturally step forward into roles they've been prevented from filling. Robert always had wisdom to offer Emma, but Patricia's tendency to manage all family communications had blocked those natural father-daughter connections. The phrase, "whatever you think," which initially felt foreign to Patricia, represents a complete paradigm shift from the need to have an opinion about everything to the freedom of trusting her husband's judgment. What makes Patricia's story particularly powerful is that the changes required weren't dramatic or complicated. She didn't need couples therapy, communication workshops, or personality transformation. She simply needed to remember that the man she married was capable, intelligent, and worthy of her trust, and then behave accordingly. The result was a return to the fundamental dynamic that creates attraction between men and women. Feminine trust and appreciation calling forth masculine leadership and protection. When Patricia stopped treating Robert like a child, he stopped behaving like one and returned to being the confident man she'd originally chosen to marry.